I never imagined my life would take such a drastic turn that summer in Chicago. At 39, I thought I had everything under control. A stable 14-year marriage to Michael, a successful career as a senior editor at a well-known publishing firm, and a comfortable home in the suburbs. But everything changed when I received that call from my best friend, Jessica. "Laura, I need your help," Jessica exclaimed, her voice a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Connor's been accepted to UC Berkeley to study architecture. He's moving to Philadelphia to start his program, and I was hoping you could help him settle in." Connor, Jessica's 19-year-old son, had always been like a nephew to me. I had watched him grow up, though I hadn't seen him in person for a few years. The last time I saw him, he was a lanky, shy teenager. Now he was about to start a new chapter in his life as a college student. "Of course," I responded without hesitation. "He's welcome to stay with us while he finds a place to live. It'll be great to help him out." Jessica thanked me profusely, and we agreed that Connor would arrive the following week. After hanging up, I went into the kitchen where Michael was preparing dinner. "Hey, do you mind if Jessica's son stays with us for a few weeks?" I asked, as I dipped a spoon into the sauce Michael was making. "Not at all," he replied, smiling. "It'll be fun to have someone younger around. We'll feel like we're in our 20s again." We laughed together and carried on with our evening, not realizing how much that seemingly innocent decision would alter the course of our lives. The week flew by with work meetings and preparations for Connor's arrival. I arranged the guest room, stocked up on groceries, and found myself obsessively cleaning every part of the house. The day Connor arrived, Michael and I drove to meet him at the airport. As I scanned the crowd of passengers, my eyes landed on a tall, athletic young man with tousled dark hair and an easy smile. It took me a second to realize this was Connor. "Aunt Laura," he called out, walking toward us with long, confident strides. A strange flutter ran through me when he hugged me. His body no longer resembled the awkward teenager I remembered, but that of a confident, grown man. I quickly stepped back, a bit unsettled by my own reaction. "Connor, wow, you've grown so much," I managed to say, keeping my voice light. Michael greeted him with a firm handshake, and we headed to the car. On the way home, Connor talked enthusiastically about his college plans, his dream of becoming an architect, and his excitement about living in the city. I found myself captivated by his energy, his youth, and his ambition. The first few days went by smoothly. Connor adjusted to our routine easily, and his presence brought a refreshing liveliness to the house. In the mornings, I watched him leave early for his classes, and in the afternoons, I'd often find him studying in the living room or outside in the backyard. One day, as I worked from home, something inside me shifted. Connor had returned early from school and was working out in the backyard. From the window, I watched as sweat dripped down his back, his muscles rippling with each movement. A sudden warmth filled my cheeks, and I quickly turned away, embarrassed by my own thoughts. That evening, over dinner, I felt a knot of guilt twist in my stomach. How could I be feeling this way about my best friend's son? "Everything okay, Laura?" Michael asked, noticing I was quieter than usual. "I'm fine, just a bit tired," I replied with a smile, though I couldn't shake the confusion that clouded my thoughts. The following days were a constant battle between my conscience and these newfound feelings I couldn't understand. I avoided being alone with Connor as much as possible, but at the same time, I found myself drawn to him. Every accidental touch, every fleeting glance set off sparks inside me that I struggled to suppress. One afternoon, I decided to show him around the city. We visited some of Chicago's iconic landmarks, and eventually we found ourselves at the observation deck of the Willis Tower. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the sprawling skyline. Connor stood next to me, our arms nearly brushing. "Thanks for everything you've done for me, Aunt Laura," Connor said, turning to me with a warm, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. "It's nothing," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's been great having you stay with us." There was a pause, a charged silence hanging between us. Our eyes met, and in that moment the world seemed to stop. Connor leaned slightly toward me, and instead of pulling away, I felt myself moving closer to him. The sudden ring of my phone broke the tension. It was Michael, asking when we would be home for dinner. I answered quickly, suggesting we head back. The entire ride home was filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence that I couldn't shake. That night, lying next to Michael, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind replayed the moment at the tower, wondering what would have happened if my phone hadn't interrupted us. Guilt gnawed at me. How could I be having these thoughts about Connor? The next few days were unbearable. The tension between Connor and me was undeniable, and I tried my best to avoid being around him. When we did cross paths, our conversations were stilted and awkward, but the looks we exchanged spoke volumes. One evening, while Michael was away on a short business trip, I found myself helping Connor fold laundry in the basement. The space was small, and every time we reached for the same item of clothing, our hands brushed. My pulse quickened. "Laura," Connor said suddenly, his voice hushed, dropping the aunt for the first time. He looked at me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned toward him, my heart racing. Before I could say anything, his lips were on mine in a kiss that was both desperate and full of longing. For a brief moment, I let myself get lost in the sensation, responding with equal intensity. But then reality hit me. I pulled away abruptly, gasping, "No, Connor. This is wrong, we can't." "But you feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his eyes full of hope and confusion. I didn't know how to respond. Instead, I ran out of the basement and locked myself in my room, tears streaming down my face. I felt trapped, torn between guilt and the desire that burned inside me. The next few days were torturous. I did everything I could to avoid Connor, but living under the same roof made it impossible. Every time we crossed paths, the tension was thick in the air. I hated the way I felt, hated myself for wanting him. Michael noticed something was off. "Are you sure you're okay, Laura?" he asked one evening at dinner. "You've been acting distant lately." "I'm fine, just stressed with work," I lied, forcing a smile. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about Connor, about how his lips felt on mine, how his touch sent shivers through my body. Every night, lying beside Michael, I imagined it was Connor holding me instead. A week after the incident in the basement, Michael had to leave again for a 3-day work conference. The thought of being alone with Connor both thrilled and terrified me. The first night I stayed in my room, avoiding any contact with him. But later that night, unable to sleep, I went downstairs to get a glass of water, and there he was sitting at the kitchen table, illuminated only by the moonlight streaming through the window. "Laura," Connor said softly when he saw me. "We need to talk. Please don't keep avoiding me." I hesitated for a moment before sitting across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What happened between us? It can't happen again," I began, my voice shaking. "I'm married. I'm your mother's best friend. And I'm much older than you." "None of that matters," he said firmly, reaching for my hand. "What I feel for you is real. I know you feel it too." I wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself leaning toward him, our lips meeting once again in a kiss that made everything else fade away. That night we crossed a line there was no going back from. In the stillness of the kitchen, our bodies came together in a way that felt both passionate and forbidden. Every touch, every kiss was charged with equal parts guilt and desire. When morning came, I found myself lying in bed, alone, feeling a mix of regret and excitement. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I didn't want to stop. Over the next couple of days, Connor and I fell deeper into the chaos we had created. Whenever we were alone, the tension between us became unbearable, giving way to passion that we both knew was forbidden. Every stolen moment felt like stepping further into dangerous territory. We shared secret kisses in the living room when Michael wasn't home, embraced in the quiet corners of the house, and exchanged heated glances that made my heart race. The guilt weighed heavily on me. I thought of Michael, my husband of nearly 14 years, who trusted me completely. I thought of Jessica, my best friend, who had sent her son into my care. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from falling deeper into this reckless affair. When Michael returned from his business trip, I tried my best to act as though nothing had changed, but every time Connor and I exchanged glances across the room, I felt an undeniable current run through me, as if he could read every guilty thought in my mind. The affair continued, each encounter more daring than the last. We took advantage of every opportunity, every moment when Michael wasn't home. It was as if we were playing a dangerous game, constantly on the verge of getting caught. One afternoon, while Michael was at work, Connor and I were passionately kissing in the kitchen when we heard the front door creak open. We quickly pulled apart, and I tried to steady my breathing as Michael walked in. "What are you two up to?" he asked, noticing the sudden movement. "Oh, I was just showing Connor how to make a family recipe for lasagna," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I tried to sound casual, but I could feel the tension in the air. Connor nodded, his cheeks flushed. "Yeah, Aunt Laura is a great cook." The irony in his words stung, but I forced a nervous laugh, praying that Michael hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. As the weeks passed, our relationship became more intense, and with that, more dangerous. It was no longer just physical attraction. I was starting to develop real feelings for Connor, and that terrified me. I knew this couldn't end well. One night, as we lay together in the guest room while Michael slept in our bedroom, Connor whispered something that made my stomach twist. "I love you, Laura," he said softly, his hand resting on mine. "I don't want this to end." I felt a rush of panic. How had this gone from a fleeting temptation to something so serious? I knew I couldn't continue this way. "Connor, this isn't love," I whispered, pulling away from him. "This, whatever this is, it's not sustainable. It's wrong. We can't keep doing this." "Is it because of Michael?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. "Do you love him?" His question hit me harder than I expected. I had spent over a decade building a life with Michael. We had shared so much together, our highs and lows, our dreams and disappointments. But what I felt with Connor was something else, something wild and consuming, and it made me question everything. "I don't know," I said quietly, feeling the weight of my own confusion. "I love him, but what we have feels different. You're my best friend's son, Connor. We're crossing lines we never should have." Connor got up from the bed, visibly upset. "So, I'm just some fling for you? Some distraction?" His words pierced through me, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. "No, it's not like that. You mean more to me than that. But we need to stop before someone gets hurt." He stormed out of the room without another word, leaving me alone to grapple with my own guilt and turmoil. In the days that followed, Connor began to distance himself from me, and the awkwardness between us grew. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was strained. Michael, still unaware of the truth, carried on as usual, but the weight of my deceit became harder to bear. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Michael announced something that sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing between Connor and me. "Why don't we take a trip? Just the three of us. It'll give us a chance to relax, unwind." Connor and I exchanged a quick glance, panic rising in both of us. "I don't know if I can," Connor said, his voice tense. "I've got a lot of work to catch up on for school." "Come on, it'll be fun," Michael insisted. "You can take a break from all the studying. Besides, Laura and I haven't had a vacation in forever." I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sure, sounds good." That night I tossed and turned, unable to shake the sinking feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. How would I survive being in such close proximity to Connor, with Michael constantly by our side? The following week, we arrived at a stunning beach resort in San Diego. The sun was hot, the ocean breeze refreshing, and the resort was beautiful. But beneath the surface of this idyllic setting, the tension between Connor and me simmered. We did our best to act normal around Michael, but every glance, every accidental brush of hands sent waves of guilt and longing through me. During the day, we spent time lounging by the pool, swimming in the ocean and taking walks along the shore. In the evenings, we dined in elegant restaurants and strolled along the beach under the stars. It should have been a perfect vacation, but for me, it felt like a ticking time bomb. One afternoon, while Michael was taking a nap in the room, Connor and I found ourselves alone in the resort's pool. The water was cool, a sharp contrast to the intense heat of the sun. We swam in silence, the tension between us palpable. "Laura," Connor whispered, his voice low as he swam closer to me. "I can't keep pretending. I miss you. I hate seeing you with him." I felt a shiver run down my spine as his words cut through the quiet. "Connor, we can't do this here. Michael could walk out any minute." "I don't care," he said softly, moving even closer, the water rippling between us. "I can't stand being near you and not touching you." My breath hitched. I knew we were playing with fire, but the intensity of the moment clouded my judgment. Before I could stop myself, I found my arms around him, and we kissed, the water lapping around us. It was reckless, dangerous, and it only heightened the thrill. Suddenly, we heard Michael's voice calling from the balcony. We jerked apart, our hearts racing. "We're here!" I shouted back, trying to sound casual as my pulse pounded in my ears. "Just swimming." Michael came down to the pool, oblivious to what had just happened. The rest of the afternoon passed in unbearable tension, at least for Connor and me. Michael, as usual, remained completely unaware. That night, as Michael slept soundly in our hotel room, I couldn't take it anymore. The guilt, the desire, the confusion, they were too much. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and made my way to the beach. The moon was full, casting a soft light over the white sand, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled the air. I hadn't been there long when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Connor approaching, his face etched with the same mix of emotions I felt. "This has to end, Connor," I said, my voice breaking. "We're hurting too many people. Jack, your mother, we can't go on like this." Connor stopped in front of me, his eyes filled with intensity. "Then let's leave it all behind. Let's go away together. We can start over, away from all of this." For a moment I allowed myself to imagine it, a life with Connor, leaving everything behind. But then reality set in. I couldn't abandon my responsibilities, my marriage, my entire life. "I can't, Connor," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "You have your whole life ahead of you. I won't be the one to take that from you, and I have a life too, even if it's not perfect." Connor's face fell. "So, that's it? You're just going to walk away?" I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "We have to." We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity before Connor finally turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the sound of the waves and the weight of my decision. The rest of the vacation was unbearable. Connor distanced himself from me, spending most of his time alone. I tried to act normal around Michael, but the strain of it all was almost too much to bear. By the time we returned to Chicago, I knew something fundamental had changed. There was no going back. In the weeks that followed, Connor moved out of our house and into a student residence, claiming it would be easier for him to focus on school. Michael and I returned to our daily routine, but the emptiness I felt was overwhelming. It was as if a part of me had been left behind on that beach. One night, as Michael and I were having dinner, I knew it was time to confront the truth. I couldn't live with the lies anymore. "Michael," I began, my voice shaking, "we need to talk." He looked up, concerned. "What is it?" With trembling hands and a heart full of dread, I told him everything. About Connor, about the affair, about the confusion I had felt. As I spoke, I watched the shock, disbelief, and anger wash over Michael's face. "How could you?" he shouted, standing up from the table. "With Jessica's son, he's practically a child." Tears streamed down my face. "I'm so sorry, I don't have an excuse. I know I've hurt you, Michael, and I hate myself for it." Michael paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard. Did I love Connor? Or had I just been in love with the idea of him? The excitement, the passion that had been missing from my life? "I don't know," I answered honestly. I know I care about him, but I also know it was wrong. I love you, Michael. We've built a life together. He stared at me, his eyes filled with pain and betrayal. I need time. I can't be here right now. He grabbed his keys and left the house, leaving me alone with my guilt and the broken pieces of our life. The days following Michael's departure were some of the hardest of my life. He stayed at his brother's house, refusing to talk to me beyond a few curt text messages. I felt the weight of what I had done pressing down on me, suffocating me. Connor tried reaching out, sending me messages, but I ignored them. I knew I couldn't continue running from the consequences of my actions. A week after my confession to Michael, I made another difficult decision. I had to face Jessica. I bought a bus ticket to Cleveland, where she lived, and spent the entire ride there battling my nerves. How could I ever look her in the eye and tell her what I had done? She trusted me with her son, and I had betrayed her in the worst way. When I arrived at Jessica's house, she greeted me with her usual bright smile, but it quickly faded when she saw the look on my face. "Laura, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, concern in her voice. We sat down in her living room, and with my heart in my throat, I told her everything. I watched the shock, confusion, and hurt play across her face as I confessed to my affair with Connor. By the time I finished, Jessica was trembling with anger. "Get out," she said through gritted teeth, her voice shaking. "Get out of my house. I never want to see you again, Laura." Tears streamed down my face as I stood and made my way to the door. "I'm so sorry, Jessica. I trusted you with my son," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "You've ruined everything." I left her house, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. I had lost my best friend forever, and the finality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. Back in Chicago, I returned to an empty home. Michael had come while I was away to gather more of his things. He left a note saying he needed more time and space to think. The silence in the house was deafening, and it was in that moment of absolute solitude that I finally faced the reality of what I had done. I had risked everything: my marriage, my closest friendship, my sense of self, for an affair that now seemed hollow and meaningless. The days stretched into weeks. I threw myself into my work, hoping it would distract me from the growing emptiness inside. Michael and I spoke only when necessary, mostly about logistics. It was clear that our marriage was beyond repair. Then, one day, I received a message from Connor. He told me he had been accepted into a study abroad program and would be moving to Europe to pursue his education. Part of me felt relief, knowing the distance would help put an end to this chapter of my life. But another part of me, the part that was still tangled in guilt and regret, felt a pang of sadness at the thought of never seeing him again. A year passed. My divorce from Michael was finalized, and we sold the house, splitting everything and going our separate ways. I started going to therapy, trying to understand why I had allowed myself to cross so many lines and betray the people I loved. It was a long road, but little by little, I began to forgive myself and rebuild my life. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. The familiar handwriting on the envelope made my heart skip a beat. It was from Connor. With shaky hands, I opened it and began to read. In the letter, Connor told me about his life in Europe, about how much he had grown and changed over the past year. Then, he got to the part that left me breathless. "Laura, I've had a lot of time to think about everything that happened between us, and I've come to realize that what we felt wasn't love. It was a fantasy, an escape from the reality of our lives. I was in love with the idea of you, of the freedom and excitement you represented, something forbidden. But it wasn't real. I know that now, and I hope you can forgive me for my part in it, just as I hope you can forgive yourself." I read and reread his words, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from my chest. Connor was right. What we had wasn't real love. It was an illusion, a way to avoid confronting the things we were missing in our own lives. Sitting in my new apartment, looking out over the bustling streets of Austin, I reflected on how much I had lost and learned. I had hurt the people I cared about the most, but I had also gained a new understanding of myself. The path to redemption wasn't easy, and rebuilding trust, if that was even possible, would take time. But I was determined to live with honesty and integrity from that moment forward. The affair with Connor had been a defining chapter of my life, one filled with pain and regret, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was learning to love myself, to face the truth about who I was, and to build relationships based on respect and trust. As the sun set over Austin, casting long shadows across the city, I felt a bittersweet mix of nostalgia and hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I was ready to move forward, with my eyes wide open and my heart ready for whatever came next. This is my story, one of love, betrayal, and redemption. It's a story that taught me that true love begins with self-love and that honesty, though sometimes painful, is the only way to find true happiness. And so, with a clearer mind and a lighter heart, I'm ready to write the next chapter of my life, with purpose, awareness, and above all, authenticity.